or council feels unified, says, yeah, we want to make these as policies, we can do that. But right now, what we call them, part of the reason they did this, I like it. And the other reason is anytime you go get a rating for bonds, you want to look at your financial policies. So I kind of copied what read some other cities, what they had, read GFOA, government finance officers, they have some guidelines and put these together. But I think it's good that you know what they are because they go in our budget every year. We had kind of adopt them as part of our budget. But I also don't want to think it's like this isn't like city code or anything. This is when putting the budget together, we want to keep these things in mind. And these are the 7 categories, and we'll just look at these. I don't think this will take too long. Budgeting. So some of them are pretty obvious. We want to have balanced budgets, right? We have whatever we budget in revenues is what we can budget in expenditures. Now, that being said, realize that if we have surplus from a previous year and we want to budget that as a capital project in the next year, your budget is still balanced. Like using reserves is okay to balance your budget. It's not a good idea maybe necessarily for your general fund. So a city I work for that I'll remain nameless, we sold a piece of property for $1 million and used that in our general fund as a revenue to pay for ongoing things. What's the problem with that? What do I do next year? I can't, if I hired people with that money, I can't, and I guess I can. Am I going to lay them off? Or I have to have money. It's like I start that $1 million in the hole, if that makes sense. But if you think about it, most of our capital projects funds are going to budget a deficit. They're going to, because we're saying we collected money this year, we're going to use it the next year. And so our revenue source is savings. And that makes sense with capital projects. Conservative estimates, I've always tried to do conservative estimates. And by that, I just mean when I look at what I think we're going to get in revenues, I don't necessarily try to stretch it. Now, every year you get into this budget thing and you're looking at trying to make things balance. And so sometimes, okay, I'm going to budget $22 million in sales tax revenues. And so then you get into things and it's like, could I budget $22,200,000 and still be reasonable? There's not an exact formula that we need to follow. There's a little bit of art to this. But by being conservative, that gives you a little margin for error. You don't really know what's going to happen, especially with sales taxes during the year. You could have certain downturns or certain things happen. And if you've not been conservative, it can get you into trouble faster. Same with expenditures. We assume that our positions are going to be filled all year long. No, there's probably going to be times when they're not filled. Of course, you have the opposite too. You have somebody who retires that's been here for 20 years and you have a vacation payout. That's money you weren't necessarily planning. Usually they kind of balance out. So now by nature, having conservative estimates is going to lead to a little bit of a surplus at the end of the year, usually. One-time funds, I talked about being careful with one-time funds. Quarterly reports, I have one today. Maybe we won't get to this till next week, or maybe we'll get to it at a council. But there's a quarterly report I've been preparing that I get to the elected officials every quarter. I never really know what to put in there. I try to put it in a somewhat format that is like our financial statements, but I don't want it to be 140 pages either. So look at that. And if you have input on things that would like something different. Part of me, I'm trying to think of what I would like to see if I was in your seat, and I don't always know. So, but we'll look at some examples of that. And I'll show you this when we get to it. But the first quarter report is always not that useful because a lot of things haven't happened. There's a lot of expenditures that haven't happened. We don't get property tax so our sales tax, the sales that occur in July are collected by the vendor in July. They're paid to the tax commission in August, and then they're paid to the city in September. So when I give you a report as of September 30th, I don't have hardly any property tax because it's all paid in December. And I've only got 1 month of sales tax. And so you look at it and there's just not a lot of good data there. So I always, on the first one, I don't know. I don't want to say it's not that useful, but sometimes it feels not that useful.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
So like just coming from the private sector, I would love to see the quarterly report compared to like previous years. I think that would be helpful, just like with the revenue to see like kind of where it compared like comparatively.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to go back very far, but maybe two years.
No, I think that's a good suggestion. Taxes, property taxes. So one of our guidelines is just that we will consider property tax rate adjustments every 2 years with the intent that maybe we would recover economic costs to do. In small amounts than longer periods of time and do larger ones. This is the cycle that I think cities get into is we're not going to do it, we're not going to do it, we're not going to do it until you get back into a corner. I'll use an example of Utah County that they hadn't done it in many, many years. They were looking at selling property to help balance their budget. And so when they did it, it was like 120% or something like that. And so I guess I would just rather do it more often in smaller. For 15 years. Property tax. I got some information a little bit later, and we'll talk about taxation and I'll just bring that up. Debt. So this is our policies related to debt. One, we talk about intergenerational fairness. So that's a long term that you see in academic literature, but really what that means is the people paying the tax should be the ones receiving the benefit. And the example I would use on that is, okay, let's say we want to build anything. So we want to build a park, and it's going to cost $10 million. So we could say, well, let's start charging. We're going to implement a little property tax or a little fee or however we're going to do it. And we're going to start charging to save up money so that we can build this $10 million park. So if I move into the city that year and I live there for 10 years while the city's collecting this money and I'm paying that fee, and then I move and then the city builds the park because we've saved up for it, I paid the tax and didn't get to use the park. Does that make sense? So sometimes when we're talking about issuing debt, maybe that's part of the reason, is to say, if I bonded for it and built it now, then the people who are using it would be the same ones paying the tax.
Yeah, I'm going to be the devil's advocate on that.
Never the devil.
Yeah. No. So I can see that, but I also see that it's kind of a pay it forward mentality. And if you look at how much we pay in interest rates, like how much interest, millions of dollars, think like, well, if we saved and paid for this one thing and then we save and pay for this other thing and that sort of thing, and we're saving ourselves interest, we're saving intergenerational debt, we're saving, like, in a sense. So
right.
there are other options too.
No, there's lots to consider, but I would also point out that the cost of that project probably goes up every year too. So I think one thing that's fair to compare is what's the interest rate versus what's the construction inflation rate too.
And if I can chime in, just to Dean's point, when we've looked at that in the recent past, construction inflation is anywhere between 7 to 10% per year, where we can get money at less than 3%. So mathematically, it makes a lot of sense to consider debt funding those types of purchases.
Debt, we would only use debt for capital projects, meaning we would, I don't know of any city that borrows money to operate on, but I put it in there. Now counties, that would be bad, right? Like, so not that we're in Chicago, but you heard about Chicago. They were going to issue, or they did, maybe they did, but they're going to issue bonds to pay their pensions, right? So I'm going to borrow this money to pay the pensions, but now I've got to come up with money to pay the bonds, which is going to cost more than the pensions, right? So I probably, I don't know. Yeah. I think by and large, most cities do a really good job with stuff like this, but it's good to put that in, right? It's good to put that in writing. And I just say we're going to match a revenue stream. If we're going to borrow money, we need to know what revenue stream we're going to use, right? We're going to do what needs to be done to maintain a good credit rating. And I put this in here because bond raters read that we're going to be very strict in adhering to all bond covenants, meaning that when we borrow money, a lot of times they'll say, I'll use a utility rate bond as an example. They'll say you need to have certain coverage. You need to look at that and say, if I take my revenue, subtract out my cash expenses, and then there's a ratio that I need to between that number between what my bond payment is. And we're always going to do that. It's probably the main bond covenant you have. And then there's just a lot of continuing disclosures that I think I said before, I spend a lot of time preparing documents that no one reads. And that's another big group of documents that I spend a couple weeks every December preparing and post to a website that I don't know if anyone ever looks at. Investments, we talked about this a little bit earlier. We need to adhere to the Utah Money Management Act. We have most of our money with the PTIF. We have a little bit with Morton Investments. We have talked with someone who thinks he can help us. Maybe we put some more money with that. So we have probably $90 million PTIF and $20 million with Morton. Maybe we could take a little bit of that PTIF money and earn a little bit more by using this other. We haven't. We do have money on deposit without the bank. So reserves, this is really just saying we need to have a reserve policy. And why would we use reserves? We'd have reserves for working capital sufficiency. What I mean by that is we get all of our property tax money in December. It's fine to have some money on reserves so that we can kind of borrow from ourselves. A county is a good example. Many counties do this because they're in the same thing. They have a calendar year. They get all of their money right at the end of the year. And so they might actually issue debt at the first part of the year that's going to get paid off at the end of the year when they do when they get their money. We would use it for emergency use, things like revenue shortfall. I mean, if we had our general fund policy, what we looked at is said if we had a recession like we had in 2009, like a 3-year recession, how much should we have on hand that we could weather that storm? Reserves in general fund are 35% by state law. Utilities, there isn't a state law, but like I said, we'd use that 180 days. We have some of our funds over 180 days though. There's not really a state law, but we want to look at reserves in utilities. Capital expenditures. Oh, yeah, the utility rates and the impact fees, I would include in that, would cover the full cost of that service, including asset replacement. So our long-term capital plans, a lot of those are tied up in our impact fee studies. Anytime you do an impact fee study, you do an impact fee facilities plan that goes out 10 years. That's where probably most of our capital planning is. And I have a slide in here on impact fees. I don't know if we'll even get to it today, but we have, I think, 9 impact fees. These studies are harder than they should be, harder than they seem. It takes a lot of people smarter than me to get together and do them. But we would be wise to refresh those maybe. But I would like to maybe see us get to the point where we're maybe doing 3. So every 3 years they're being. One is you lose. They talked about this the other night, the inflation part that you lose if you're not updating. The other part is the state auditor's office has gotten really looking at these closely to say, hey, are the projects that are in your plan, or that's what you're using for? And if we're not updating those projects regularly, we can get ourselves into trouble that way.
Dean, it seems like too, if we go through it, we can then put into it that every 2 years, we're just gonna raise it based on inflation for each of these. Can we?
You know, I think, I'm trying to remember, because it seems like, I know when they came the other night, they talked about doing an update every couple of years. And I should say, it's, what I'll see them do sometimes is we'll do a full one, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years, we do just a brush up to it, if that makes sense. To just update price, update cost. So we're not going through the whole study, the whole method of how we calculated everything, looking at traffic counts again, but we're just kind of updating the project. Yeah. Yeah.
They would say that that would work. So you don't have to go through the whole study. You just
I
have
like
to
it,
show
yeah.
that it's changed based on inflation. And then everything gets updated every 2 years. And then maybe do like bigger studies every 10 years or
Yeah,
something.
something, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, keeping those current is important.
Well, and into like the housing conversation, so developers often complain like the impact fees that the city are making housing so.
Yep.
It's like one line item in there, like P and L, but.
Yeah.
What can, my perspective, when I wear my city hat in this position, I'm uncomfortable lowering impact fees and placing the burden in other taxes across the tax base.
Well, and what I'd say, especially, so road is what is, especially the utilities. So I would think as city councils, you want the impact fee to be as high as possible. Because if I have infrastructure that needs to be built, anything that's not paid for by impact fees would have to be paid by current ratepayers, right? So
But
it's
when they come at us for the affordability of
Yeah.
housing and they're saying it's lower let's make things more affordable. One way that they're coming at it is
yeah,
makes me comfortable because like you said,
you're
that
gonna pass it on to,
current residents.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, we're either going to transfer it on to the growth or we're going to transfer it on to the current residents. And I just don't know if this is the line item to attack when we talk about housing
Sure.
affordability, but I know that it's often brought
sure.
up.
If you build a single family home in Lehi, I'm guessing you're paying $12,000 to $13,000 in impact fees, which sounds like a lot. 25, okay, which is a lot, right? But it's also, yeah, but it's also out of a $800,000 home or whatnot.
If I can add to your point, so we had a housing affordability workshop, and one of the major home builders in the state, their president was asked if we as cities, across the board, uniformly decided to cut impact fees by 10%, would you then pass that savings on to the end user? And they said no. They said no. We want to make as much money as possible. So to your point, they're going to sell it at market rate, and oftentimes impact fees are used as a scapegoat. But really, the issue, and I'm sure each of you have heard this, the biggest issue on our residents' mind is growth and the pains associated with growth. And when we lower impact fees, now we're saying not only is growth coming, but you're subsidizing it. And I think if people understood how that worked, they would be furious.
Yeah, and this might be slightly off topic and then I'll wrap it up. But one thing that we could consider as a council, if we're going to look at affordability, and I think Kim would be maybe not so happy that I said this, is our design standards. When we put certain material types and design requirements into our standards, the market reacts by raising the cost of those materials because they now know they're required. Not saying we should remove all standards together, but that is an approach we could take possibly. And there's just to do this. But impact fee conversation, it just always makes me worried when they talk about, well, dropping the impact fee, and it just places additional tax burden elsewhere.
And it's just that they're not easy to monitor, and we're doing
aspect, the infrastructure, and that's what we can't
week, yeah.
Dean,
Uh, yeah,
I'm sorry.
you're great.
Can we go back a slide, I think?
This one?
Yeah, so the utility one. Yeah,
This one or the
Yeah.
next? Sorry, this one.
Done.
Okay.
right there. Utility rates cover full cost including.
Yeah.
That, the question I've had is the new power generating plants that we're building, bonding against, it will be through the rates,
Uh-huh.
rate payment. But are those new facilities required for the new growth, or I mean, there's probably both,
Yeah,
some of
when
both.
they did
but-
the last power, remember we did a power impact fee study update not too long ago. And they didn't, so in her calculations, she took what the cost of that generation and she allocated some to new growth and some to
Okay,
existing users.
okay, thank you.
See, last one, financial planning. This is something I'm working on and I'm not quite there yet, but just especially with our utility funds, we do 5-year projections and we look at that. With our general fund, I'd like to do a little more with that. This is one where we talked about multi-year financial planning, capital planning. We do some, see more related to the impact fees than others, but something to show that we're not just looking at this year, we're looking at future years. Okay, so I have one more. Do you want a break? We're good? Okay. I will be done by 4:30. Well, I can just stop. I can just stop talking anytime I want. I, I won't be done. I will quit at 4:30. So this may actually go pretty fast because we've kind of been talking about some of this already. So I put this together a few years ago and many of you seen it before. And so I apologize for that, but I think it's just the best way that I've come up with to just explain this process. Okay, the history of truth and taxation, I think we've talked about all of that. Trying to get inflation out of property taxes. And really, I think what's important, when I say there, we changed from a rate base to a revenue base. So in some ways, the rate you pay is not the number that's important because you're backing into the number. They look and say, to calculate the certified tax rate, here's the revenue that we think represents zero inflation. And then they calculate the taxable value and then just back into the rate. That makes sense. So certified tax rate, I think we've talked about that. Excludes. So the goal is excluding growth that the taxing entity would receive the same revenue as the previous year. And any tax increase, that any new money for inflation would have to go through the truth and taxation process. Yes. I use TNT a lot. I think that's important. The law doesn't. If you want to charge a rate higher than the certain process, and really, like It's not that hard, it's just very, there's a lot of notice. Like, a lot of steps in place. By and large, you know, last year, they requirements, didn't do it last year, so I'm not. Paper, there are several. Really, what it all comes down to is you need to have a public. It's a special public. Have the government hearing. Certain time, it can't be, we couldn't have our taxation hearing at the same time as district was having their tax affected by two.
So since it's kind of in place to raise property taxes every 2 years and it was 2022 and 2024, is that scheduled for this year? Basically based, is that,
Yeah, we discussed it.
okay, that's for discussion. Okay.
Can I ask the council members that were, just, what was that like when you, was it seem more complicated, like from the
I think I was kind of surprised how little the public noticed it. I think there was some public comments that were made that were concerned about being able to their affordability. And this also not having, I just think there's not enough information there with like what can be done. Like people don't know about being able to like get like for seniors and that to get their discount rate or I think possibly because it was such a minor increase. I think it was like dollars a year in 2022, and I think similar in 2024. Yeah, something like 12 and maybe like 14. So it was pretty small, but it seems like the school district ones got a lot more because it was a more significant one. And I know with the school district one, a lot of the complaints I have too is that it doesn't show the debt dropping off. And so they were doing a lot of trying to educate of like, yes, we're doing this incremental cost. It's not showing the debt. So what you're seeing on your sheet is not actually what you're going to pay. So it'd be better if there's more detailed information about what it actually the end result. But multiple times, and sometimes there wasn't anybody there for the whole process.
Sure. It's never a bad thing to hear from the public and for them to express their views. So as far as that goes, I don't think it was a problem at all. But for me personally, I would have liked to look at the budget deeper and I think it was my first. For that, besides the tax increase.
Thanks for
Okay.
sharing.
Question. So I'm reading here that there increase. Yeah. So typically the budget. If there's property tax increases contemplated, budget remains tentative until it's finally adopted in August. So basically you would do a truth and taxation prior to that, prior to June. That's typical. That has to be in August. They get a hearing after they get their tax notices of it increasing. Okay.
Rachel, we agree with you 100%. It feels backwards because as we're putting the budget together, we're like, we don't know if we're going to be able to do this. And I think the way we've worked around it is we kind of put almost two budgets together if the tax increase doesn't go through and then if it does. So, but yeah, your points.
I think there's a bill on that too. Yeah, changing the dates.
Could be in favor of that, just from a strictly logistical perspective.
$1,000 resident, what they would, based on last year's property. So the way the calendar works, I guess we'll just talk about that. In March, I need to notify the county if we're considering it. Because if we don't notify them in March, we can't do it later. So it's kind of like you need to notify them in March, and then if you go ahead. April, we've got the tentative budget. May we adopt our budget. This is always a challenge. We actually don't get our valuations. So like you have to have all of your budget basically done before you. And there's not a way, I don't know of a way around. Like the county, if you think about it from the county perspective, they're supposed to assess the valuation of every property as of January 1st. Yeah. So we don't get, also comes down to is we don't get numbers until about the second week in June.
How is any of that accurate when like just Lehi alone is like $13 billion worth of
Yeah.
assessable value?
So I'm not an assessor or a statistician, but I think they get a lot of factoring. It's just, I think it's really hard work and
Yeah.
almost impossible.
Yeah.
But the state law says it's the value of that property. They have to get a value for every person's property. But back in the old days, they used to just do like a fifth of them. And so what happened one year was, this was up in or Davis County. It just, so if you think about it, if properties are kind of going up gradually, it's probably fine. But what if one year it's really high? And all of a sudden your values went up a lot. And so certain parts where their values overall went up high, but it was only theirs that got assessed. Tax increases, and so people saw. So I think by state law, you reassess everything.
You just don't even know how that's possible.
So Dean, the June, when you receive the tax valuation, is that when you know how much the certified tax rate, I mean, the revenue, right? Plus new growth from
Yeah.
last year? That's after we pass the budget usually. Wow.
Tax increase we do it. Okay, so this is an example I put together several years ago. I'm not saying it's great, but it's about the best to try to give an example. So I said, we're going to have this generic Utah town. This town has 10 houses in it. Every one of those houses is valued at $300,000. Now, your primary resident, you get a 45% exemption. So if I were to calculate taxes on this, it's 0.2%, I take $1,000, subtract 45% of that, but I times it by percent, and that works up to 300. Every one of these 10 homes is 330. A town.
8 of them are secondary residences.
Using outlet sewer system. Okay, so the first year, we have the 10 homes, they each pay 300. City gets 3,300. So let's go to year 2. Still have our 10 homes. Now, every property up by 10%. Now they're all valued at $300. The state would come in and say, okay, your certified tax rate now going down. So year 2 comes in. Now every property owner still pays $330, assuming that the taxing entity accepted the certified tax. Property owner pays $330. Tax receipts are $3,000.
This is why we like sales tax.
And sales tax doesn't have a truth in taxation. And no one knows about it. So. Okay, let's go to the next year. Now we've built 2 more homes. Now we have 12. That's right. We built 2 homes. Now we have 12. The value didn't change. Since the value didn't change, the certified tax rate. So now every property still pays $330, but the city gets $660 more. That's where you get. Okay, let's go to year 4. In this town, we still have 12 homes. That half of the city, the homes went up 10%. That half of the city, the homes went down 10%. So now we have 6 homes valued at $300,000, and I have 6 valued at $297,000. Overall valuation as a city didn't change, right? Because half of them went up and half of them went down. So the certified tax rate doesn't change. Still 181. But what happens? 6 of those homeowners, taxes are going to go up. 6 of them then. So it doesn't hold the homeowner, right? It just says the taxing entity determines what the taxing entity is, not related to individual. And so this is a very simple example, but if I looked at this and said, okay, now this is Aspen Peak School District, and Lehi values went up, and Highland values went up, the same thing would happen. Or I could say commercial values went up, residential values didn't go up as much. Now profits would shift.
Commercial pays the full 100.
They do.
So already it's
Already
tilted
it makes
against.
So I guess this is a very philosophical question, but I mean, if you fast forward 50 years in Lehi, we're fully built out, right? You start seeing maybe home values. I mean, it could go one direction or the other. We don't know, right? But if you look in other counties, typically they kind of level out. So we've talked about this during the campaign, and since then, increasing our commercial and retail tax base to kind of protect against that. Because as a city, we're going to hit a peak, right? And start to plateau with property tax is probably a good guess. So open to ideas. I know, Marlon, you probably agree somewhat with that assessment because I know you like commercial tax revenue, but I mean, what can we, I guess my question is, and we don't have to answer it now, is how can we prepare now? Because once you zone land and people break ground, that's it, right? So, and this is maybe to Rachel's point at the city council meeting, do we look at the general plan again? Do we kind of revise that since we've grown so rapid? Good. No, you're good.
My point would be, I'm gonna say the quiet part out loud. Shocker. But this is why we pursue RDAs, to bring all that in. That's one reason, not always should, but that's one explanation for an RDA. And then I think as a council, we just need to decide our priorities. Having just done a general plan amendment, I'm much more interested in putting funds towards police officers this year, personally. But that doesn't mean we can't do smaller amendments. That would just be my 2 thoughts.
I think you're saying amend the general plan versus do the whole thing, right, Emily? Okay. So
My thing is commercial still has to go where it's viable. We saw that with the Water's Edge. You know, they weren't going to put commercial in there. They're not going to put retail in there because they don't have frontage. So there's only so many places where commercial is going to make sense. And even along 2100, everybody's like, you know, we want all this commercial here. There's commercial land there. We've like tried to get things there. We were in competition to get the other Costco there, and we lost it to Saratoga Springs. So the commercial land is available, but we have to still do things to be able to entice people to come in and build it. So I think if there was something we were looking at, like, hey, this is zone something else, we think commercial could be viable here. I think there's, you know, to be able to rezone that and try and encourage that is one thing, but it's not like we're hurting for commercial land in the city either. It's we're hurting to be able to, you know, bring in everybody they need to. And on the other hand, you look at the amount of sales tax we have now and know that we're growing, like we're not hurting compared to some of these other cities. So it's like we're, you know, we're doing well. We're bringing in car dealerships, which really are, you know, big money revenues. So, I mean, I think there's a lot more that we can do, but it's also, we're miles ahead of some of these other cities too. And we have areas where they can come in.
I wonder what Saratoga's done because they lowered their property tax recently and they have a large retail base. I don't know if that contributes. Maybe not larger than us, I'm not sure.
They also raised it a lot. They, in the past, yeah, when I talked to Mayor Carnes, they did, I think 2 times they lowered taxes. They're lower than us now, but they're also growing. And they're growing about 3 times our rate right now. They in Eagle Mountain said they're adding 6,000 residents a year. So growth is really paying for a lot of stuff too. But, and then of course, where they're built, they're getting all the commercial. And we, you know, in that west side, because they're getting it, you know, they're in the middle between Eagle Mountain and Lehi. So that's where those commercial businesses want to build. So how do we entice them to come in to our side?
And that's where our residents go shop. on the
Yeah,
west side.
exactly.
Sorry, this is probably a longer conversation than we have time for today, because I think there's a lot of different opinions here. And to say that commercial retail won't go into certain places where there is retail and commercial going in, you know, I kind of question that. But I do have a kind of off-topic question from this discussion, but what effect would lowering, or I guess increasing the residential tax exemption have on commercial? To me, it's going to shift the burden to commercial, discourage that from being built. I mean, yeah. Revenue would stay.
It would impact commercial disproportionately to residential.
And yeah. But to me, and I think going along with what James said, it's going to have this long-term effect that, I mean, I'm already hearing that it's very difficult to pay for, you know, businesses who want to come in, that the rent and lease is really high. So I think if we do that shift, it's going to make it even harder and discourage economic growth, which, you know, some of us would like to see more of that, you know, to help the residents. So am I off track here? To me, so they're trying to fix a problem. They're going to create another problem that's going to, you know, make the original problem worse. Is that too far off track or?
if I could speculate, Michelle, because I agree with you, I don't know if it would so much impact the retailers because it would be statewide. So whether they land in American Fork or Saratoga or Lehi, they're still going to have to deal with that same tax distribution. Where I think it would really impact though is when you have these big companies considering Utah versus Nevada versus Washington, right? Now they're increasing the tax rate across the whole state. So and to me, that's a bigger kick in the gut, you know, what if you lose out on huge companies with jobs and yes.
Well, I already know that you're right. That's a good point. And I guess I'm thinking more small businesses, people I've talked to where they want to do more home occupation because they can't afford to lease a building kind of.
And I would agree with that too.
Going back to the impact fees idea of reevaluating those, just to make sure that they're accurate is, I don't think it's the worst idea. I think it's smart, important. That would affect both commercial and residential.
Now, I thought I just mentioned this, so you may have noticed, I guess in the past 5 years, it's next to the problem. Say, well, if all this is true, I mean, other than the first one is, especially in 22, so COVID hits, commercial values go down. These didn't go up. Residential properties went up a lot. That year it was like, and that year you could go look and there was absolutely a shift from. You could go look up this public data, but you could go look up any of these options. And that happened. That was a big shift that happened. The other thing we had is the basic school levy. Where basic school levy, if I say something wrong, anybody correct me. I don't think I'm an expert on, but look at a school property tax rate. It's really like 4 or 5, not just one. Rate that they charge for their operations. There's capital levy, debt service levy. If you know. Also, what is the basic school levy? That levy is charged by the state. They're controlled by the state. It goes through the school district, which is part of their rate. But that's the primary funding of the so that money is charged as a school district tax. The school district doesn't necessarily get it directly. So distributed all school districts based on the number of students. So in a way to get more money into schools, the state locked that basic school levy instead of full. So regardless of whatever happened through taxation, it wouldn't. And it just so happened there was a lot of appreciation in this year. So a lot of our recent property. You also have things like valuation appeals. That comes up if a lot of people valuation and win. If their property values go down, it can get shifted back. I put judgment levies in there. We don't really see that here. We see some cities with that where you have centrally assessed properties. They get a judgment where they pay these property taxes. Actually, we don't have any of this, so I'm not sure. But you can actually go through the taxation tree.
Do you happen to know with the school when they froze the basic levy, that was for a certain number of years, right? Is it sunset? Okay.
In other words, if this is going down, that means there is a lot of appreciation, right? And so, but the basic school levy, I think it was calculation was probably more complicated than I'm giving it, but it was locked. I think it could go over 6, so it stayed right. And then I put this in here. This isn't exactly what I was talking about on the commercial residential shift, but it kind of shows like in 2018, 52% of our taxable valuation was commercial. And so now it could shift back. You get a big surge in commercial value. There's a lot of demand for it. So this is what I come up with. A lot of this is kind of estimates. Property tax rate today is 1163. Our estimated certified property tax rate. This is really just based on trends. It's not really based on data because I don't really know how to come up with this stuff. But I'm just saying things happen next year, like an average of what they happened the past few years. I think our one stay with the certified tax rate property tax. That's 15.6 million. In tax increase that just matched CPI. That was $600,000 more. Just to get an idea of what. So that would generate $1.71 rate would generate less than 9. Sounds about right because that's pretty slow. Let's have a break.
Hey, James. So
it doesn't have to be easier.
No, that's a good.
A small and
Yeah. I'd also like that we kind of look at it holistically, because I mean, you look at homework. It's supposed to be. Yeah, and it's like. So when that happens, now it's like, okay, now. So I want to look at like boxes. See if it starts like preempt. It's more about the principle than they're like. But
Yeah, and then just so you're clear, I don't support any.
Like,
That's not what I was saying.
that's good.
But that's,
No, I get
but
I
that's
get the
why,
concept.
that's why
Now we've got a lot of different economic development. Different. It's all the same. I'd say
So the developer in this one, in this case, has skin in the game to get this stuff built for us, correct? We get paid first. He gets paid last. Okay.
Question for Marlon. Could we use that money for our portion of the warming center? Our contribution to the county warming?
So stop, because we can have you finish up next week and whatever you didn't get to today. Okay. Mayor, did you want to cover the other item or do you want to save that one as well?
Either way. You want to save it till next Thursday?
You want to do that, Tisha? Oh, yeah, because Emily had to go, it looks like. So yeah, why don't we save that till next week too?
Okay. So we'll adjourn the meeting. Are we done?
Yes, I think so, unless you have anything else you'd like to cover.
I have nothing else I'd like to cover. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to cover? I got to go home and pull out a calculator and start to figure things out. So I'll let you all know. Meeting's adjourned.